Refusing to deal with numbers rarely serves the interests of the least well-off. This is the last sentence of Thomas Piketty's book Capital in the 21st Century from 2013. It motivated me to learn about reasons behind short-term solutions and inequality. My goal is to find ideas for more sustainability and equality. With this, I want to welcome you to the first Sustainability and Equality book review. Before getting into the details of the book, a word on economics and scientific research in general. Piketty thinks the economic sciences should be a subcategory of the social sciences. The social sciences, like politics, history, and culture, have a direct impact on the economy. To limit our expectations for immediate world-changing results, it is notoriously difficult to get reliable data in the social sciences. Scientists aren't able to repeat many experiments with the same outcomes. This is called the replication crisis. I love research, and it's important to acknowledge limits, even though nuance is not great for catchy YouTube titles. Piketty emphasizes that his data is based on estimates, as no exact numbers exist. So, conclusions are by no means exact, but can give a general understanding, which is great. I read reviews by Yanis, Varoufakis, Lawrence Summers, Paul Mason, and many more. The takeaway? Piketty's data and data analysis are excellent. His theory is shaky, and the policy recommendations are not relevant or even bad for realistic suggestions. Considering those reviews, we will focus on the data and data analysis. In the video description below, you can find more information about the mentioned reviewers. One problem for suggesting good policy is Piketty's assumption that wealth and capital are the same thing. For this video, we accept this assumption. If you're interested in the difference between wealth and capital and how this difference affects what is written in Piketty's book, let me know in the comments. Piketty's book can be summarized in 5 takeaways: wealth concentration, the history of inequality, the incompatibility of globalization, democracy, and nations, the illiteracy about wealth, and last and especially least, the global progressive wealth tax. Let's go through them one by one, starting with wealth concentration. Capitalism does not naturally stop wealth concentration. Piketty identifies education and knowledge as the only forces in capitalism that reduce inequality. Frequently named forces like life expectancy as well as production technologies do not reduce inequality in the analyzed data. So if you hear that somewhere, be a bit more skeptical. As forces that increase inequality, Piketty sees lacking investment in education, self-determined wages of top managers, as well as high capital yield during slow economic growth. Capital yield is in percent how much more capital you have after 1 year of investing. And slow economic growth is the historic norm, leading to Piketty's observation of R, the capital yield, being larger than G, the economic growth. Depending on the policies, taxes can work in either direction. So, the influence of taxes on wealth inequality depends, at least partially, on each nation, which we will come back to later. In the worst case, income and wealth inequality are only limited through violent uprisings of the poor, revolutions. In order to increase inequality beyond a certain level, disagreement must be repressed and inequality justified on a systemic level. Inequality of labor income, for example, can be justified through degrees from elite universities that have an obscure student selection process. And with this slightly depressing insight, let's have a look at the historic ups and downs of inequality. Inequality can be divided in 3 groups: income from labor, income from wealth, and the sum of income from labor and wealth. Labor income inequality is lower than wealth inequality. The top 10% of labor income earners receive 25 to 30% of the overall income. The top 10% wealthiest individuals always own more than 50% of wealth and up to 90%. Political systems seem to only have a minor impact on inequality, as the French Revolution from 1789 to 1799 had no significant impact on the capital distribution. Technically, socialism had an impact on inequality, but that's a completely different story. Around 1800, the inequality in the US was comparable to the 1970s and 80s in Scandinavian countries, probably the most equal places in recent world history. By 1920, inequality in the US significantly caught up with Europe. In Europe, capital was accumulated until 1914, which, you might have guessed it by naming a specific year, is the start of a war. The First and Second World War, with the Great Depression in between, wiped out most private capital. Europe reached its lowest inequality following the Second World War. The US had its historically lowest inequality during the time of independence, around 1800. 1950 to 1970 was marked by economic growth, especially in countries that were hit hardest by the historic events before, as they implemented state-of-the-art production technologies, making a jump in productivity. Around 1960, inequality in the US overtook Europe. Since 1990, capital yield has been higher than economic growth, so the wealthy accumulate capital, increasing inequality and bringing us to the world as we know it today. To not have an hour-long video, here are some things that are worth it to be discussed in more detail, but I'll only mention shortly. Inheritance. Inheritance is very important when talking about wealth inequality. Only wealthy people pass on significant wealth. Inequality between countries and continents. This inequality is smaller than inequalities between individuals in a single country, and the continent of Africa is the only place with significant capital drain. Purchase power. Purchase power today is 10 times higher compared to 1800. At least some good news. Inequality of labor income in the US. US labor income inequality is much greater than in Europe. Dependency of capital and capital yield. More capital equals higher capital yield. Let me know in the comments in case you want to know more about these topics. Takeaway number 3. Nations, democracy and globalization cannot sustainably coexist at the same time, which, to be totally honest, was the first time I heard about this, but it made sense to me rather quickly. Here comes the reason why. Globalization requires the free movement of capital. If capital can move freely, the taxes on capital will diminish as nations compete for investments. With this competition, you see why taxes depend on each nation only partially. Reduced taxes on capital income lead to lower taxes for the rich, reducing the trust of the higher taxed middle class in the government and increasing inequality, which will result in national oligarchies rather than democracies. This is an oversimplification of a very complex topic, but basically what is currently happening around the world. At the same time, a reduced tax base narrows the scope of services that the government can supply. Countries that impose taxes between 10 to 15% on the national income will only be able to cover basic services: military, police, firefighters, protection of ownership, and so on. Since 1910, the tax income was increased in many countries to cover education and health, which require investments of 10 to 15% of the national income. Retirement, 6 to 13% of the national income. Unemployment benefits, 1 to 2% of the national income. And social welfare, with less than 1% of the national income. Takeaway number 4. Global illiteracy about wealth. There's a lack of knowledge and transparency about wealth. This missing information makes it difficult to analyze wealth and wealth inequality. How do you want to analyze something without data? You use things like the Forbes ranking of billionaires and similar lists, which have many shortcomings. And those shortcomings, of course, influence the reliability of conclusions. And just for the sake of completeness, Piketty recommends a global progressive wealth tax, which even he thinks is utopian. However, he sees national protectionism as a more realistic outcome of the coming years. Which, looking back at the past 7 years, sounds about right. I hope this video gave you a quick summary of the most important takeaways from Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century. If you liked or didn't like this video, give it a thumbs up or down, click the notification bell and subscribe for more videos. My next video will probably be about Paul Mason's Post-Capitalism, a guide to our future.